All right. One of my guys, my favorites, Ryan Burns, Gopher Illustrated.com. Before we get into Minnesota and their 2023 season outlook, Ryan, shout outs to your Minnesota Twins for being above 500, carrying the AL Central. So shouts to you guys.
We could spend an hour on the AL Central, but you, me, Bach, Mike Schaefer, who's a big Cleveland Guardians guy, just about the ineptitude of this division. And we have the #1 pitching staff in baseball, yet we are struggling to get over 500. But welcome to one of the worst offenses in the league. Yeah, it's just been – they're a very frustrating team because with your White Sox, you at least know they're mediocre no matter what. The Twins should be pretty decent, like 7 games above 500 right now. I think the stat to know with them is they've had 13 losses where they've like allowed 3 runs or less. That's remarkable. That leads baseball. Yeah. It's like #1 with a bullet by 5 games. So if they win half of those, they'd be like 8-9 games above 500. But I'm going off the deep end here.
But you will still find a way to get into the playoffs, Ryan. Except it's going to end with a series sweep to the.
I think the Minnesota Twins have lost like 21 straight playoff games. So I can't wait for it to be the 3rd team out of the AL East. Probably the New York Yankees because they end the season of the Minnesota Twins every year, and I cannot wait for them to lose 3-2, 2-1, and 5-2. It's the way it goes in Minnesota sports.
It's the life of the AL Central as well. I was going to try to make an AL Central to Big Ten West comp, but I do feel like the Big Ten West is a little bit more competitive than that. Maybe we're more the NL Central than the AL Central. But I want to bring this up. I said when Lovie Smith and PJ Fleck came into the Big Ten, it'd be interesting to watch how these 2 experiments worked. And because they were so different, so different backgrounds. And ultimately, obviously, the younger guy with the college experience has had way more success. But maybe it's his personality, Ryan, that some people don't like, obviously. But maybe it's because he hasn't played in a Big Ten championship game yet. But I don't know if we talk enough about Fleck's success in the Big Ten, at least regionally and across the Big Ten, because the last 3 non-COVID seasons, he's had 9+ wins in every year. He's 7-2, 6-3, 5-4 in the Big Ten. He has 4 straight bowl wins. What has PJ Fleck meant to that Gophers program, and why has he had this success?
Well, I mean, you steal a lot of my talking points because a lot of people don't know those things. They think of Minnesota football and they think of what it largely has been for my 30 years of existence on this planet, and that's mediocre. I mean, they had some good years with Jerry Kill and Tracy Claeys. They had some good years with Glenn Mason back in the day, but the Tim Bruce era was an absolute dumpster fire. The way it ended for Jerry Kill and Tracy Claeys with was a big scandal, obviously. Didn't go well for Minnesota back then. But what Fleck has done here, I mean, he's winning. Now, is he winning the Big Ten West, which you mentioned those 2019, 2021, 2022 seasons? Somehow found a way to win that many games, 11, especially 11 in 2019, and find a way not to get to Indianapolis, which we've spent a lot of time talking about here in the Minneapolis market here in the last 4 or 5 years. But they're winning consistently, and that's tough to do at a place like Minnesota. To your point, they've been above 500 in the Big Ten. They've won 9 or more games each of the last 3 years. I think the last 4 NFL drafts, they've had as many players drafted since 1988 to 1991. I mean, they're relevant now, which it was going to be with the PJ Fleck hire. You were going to know pretty quickly if this thing was going to get turned around, and he's turned it around. And now I think Minnesota's in a good spot. But that's where I'm curious to even get your impressions today as we continue to kind of talk about Minnesota and even Illinois. It seems to me that maybe the regional prognosticators and the national prognosticators have this thing pegged as an Iowa and Wisconsin race once again for the Big Ten West in the final year. But do I think Minnesota's got a shot? I do. Do I think Illinois, I really feel like not enough people are talking about Illinois in this thing with the front 7 that they obviously have there. But, what Fleck has done here, and I get it. If you don't like his personality, that's fine. Yeah. I would just say this. For someone who's had hundreds of interactions with the man, whether the camera's on, camera's off, he is who he is. He's not a walking Red Bull. He's 5 Red Bulls all the time. And I totally understand why people don't like that. It's off-putting, but you just get used to it for someone like myself after a while. And obviously the proof is in the pudding. The man knows how to win.
Yeah, no, that's not my style. Like I don't gravitate towards that, but dude, it works. And it works for him. It works for his program. And I have a ton of respect for what he's done there. And I agree with you with the Illinois Minnesota thing. I wouldn't label either of those teams as the favorite, right? Because they have questions. They have to replace a lot of talent that's done well for them the last couple of years. But what I find so interesting about Fleck and Bielema is they built a way higher floor at their programs. Obviously, Bielema has done it a little quicker, like 2 years, but Fleck has just sustained that. Like Fleck is kind of what Illinois wants to be, which is this consistent program. Maybe it's not quite Iowa levels of ceiling yet, but we did see them finish 10th in the AP poll, as you said, a couple of years ago. Right. It's amazing, though. Like, I feel like both these teams missed their chance to win the Big Ten West. Like, it feels like Minnesota, obviously, that year did it. Illinois last year with the way it crumbled. I think we got to remember at one point, Minnesota was 5-0 and leading the Big Ten West. And everyone's like, oh, is this the year that they break through? But I do think Iowa has enough flaws, obviously, offensively. I probably have them as favorite just because I respect Phil Parker so much. But Wisconsin, I get their high ceiling, but there's also a lot of newness there, Ryan. I do think it's a 4-team race in the Big Ten West. I'm not going with Nebraska yet. I just think that's a complete rebuild. But given that Purdue has to change a lot, given that Northwestern's a dumpster fire right now, like I think those two teams are going to be in it in November for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you say that Iowa to you is like the slight favorite, because I've said that for months now. But I can assure you Vegas doesn't agree with us, where I think when those first win total projections came out, I think Wisconsin was at 9 or 9.5. Iowa was sitting at 7.5. Now, I think they've both corrected a little bit, where Iowa's around 8, 8.5. You can find places. Wisconsin's pretty consistently at 8.5. But I just have so many questions about Wisconsin. Now, I think, they're probably the second best team in the West, but I don't think enough people are talking about, everybody's loving Phil Longo and what they're going to do offensively to pair with Braylon Allen, and I get it. But I feel like people are forgetting about that Jim Leonard's gone, and I think Jim Leonard was one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. They lose Keanu Benton, who was a great defensive tackle for them. PJ Fleck loves to say that kid finally played hard for 60 minutes against us, and he kicked the crap out of them when they played at the end of the season. And then there was a reason he was a top 100 draft pick. They lost Nick Herbig, obviously. I think John Torchio is also gone. So I have a lot of questions there defensively. I'm just not going to be used to potentially seeing Wisconsin win games 27-24, 31-28 potentially. Now, I'm not telling you they're going to be awful defensively, but I think they're certainly not going to be anywhere close to what Illinois is, Iowa is, potentially Minnesota is. And then to your point with Iowa, I mean, I don't pretend to tell you that some other people in our network might, that Cade McNamara is going to be touchdown Jesus for the Iowa Hawkeyes, but
doesn't need to be with that defense, right?
No, with what they got coming back there, obviously, and with how easy the schedule is for Iowa. But to your point about missed opportunities for Illinois last year, I still can't believe that it went the way that it did for Illinois. It looked like this was going to be the year for Brett Bielema to get back to Indianapolis there, and obviously it didn't go that way. But I feel like I've been saying that for the last 3 full seasons with Minnesota. They've had their shots, but as Fleck loves to say, I mean, they brought him here to have a shot in November. Minnesota's had their shot. They haven't been able to get it. Right. But I think it would be kind of ironic that in the final year of the Big Ten West, I think Wisconsin is favorited for the 4th straight year to get to Indianapolis. They haven't made it there any of the last 4 years or last 3 years. We'll see if year 4 is a little bit different for Luke Fickell in year 1. But I think I also looked up the stat before we kind of transition here that the last time a year 1 Big Ten West head coach won, I think it was 8 or more, 9 or more games. Can you guess who it was?
Oh, geez. I have no idea.
It was Paul Chryst first year at Wisconsin.
That's a good.
So, I mean, it's not unheard of, but I don't know. I mean, you can agree or disagree with this statement. It's just, I looked at Wisconsin's roster last year and I think about what they had talent wise in the mid 2010s and the late 2010s. And I looked at what they had last year. I don't know, man. Especially defensively, when you're looking for portal help in the secondary in June and July, I don't have to tell you, there's not a lot where you can spin that.
And you and I know they aren't as good in the trenches as they were. Illinois and Minnesota both won those battles in the trenches. I think that tells you a little bit. So I think there's just a lot of newness, and newness doesn't always translate immediately. But I respect Fickell. They've added a lot of talent. It's going to be interesting to watch. I just think it's more open like you do. All right, Minnesota, transition year offensively, right? Sure. I mean, Tanner Morgan gone, but you also Ethan Kalimakis had a lot of experience last year. So let's start at that quarterback position. What do you think of Ethan and what he did last year and what he can do this year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the high man in the room on Ethan. It's interesting to always get differing opinions because I'm not saying mine's always right. I'm always, if you ask my wife, I'm usually always wrong. But it's interesting to hear regional and national opinions on Ethan Kaliakmanis because people think not too highly of him. And again, if you look at the stats from last year, 54% completion percentage, 3 to 4 touchdown to interception ratio there. I get that. But I think you have to look at the last 6 quarters of play for him where he goes into Camp Randall, throws for 300 yards, makes some throws and even some athletic plays within the pocket to extend the play, get some first downs with his legs. And then you look at what he brought against Syracuse in the bowl game before going down with a high ankle sprain. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is going to be my 12th year covering the Gopher football team. I think he's the most physically talented quarterback that they've had. I think that's incredibly apparent to me. I think the internal expectations for him are very lofty. I think if it all breaks right for him in 3 years, the kid from Antioch is going to be the first Gopher quarterback drafted since the 1960s, which sweet Moses of Mary, is that a long time? So I just think that when you look at him this fall, I've said this before and I even wrote it again today. I think there's going to be bumps in the road because it's going to be his first year as the full-time starter. He's got the prospect pedigree coming out of high school back in Antioch, Illinois there. He was a 4-star, had a lot of great offers. And I just think that, whoever you want to talk to there, I mean, I would say this, my sources hate to really hype up a kid because they always want to be, don't want to set lofty expectations. But if you just ask about him behind the scenes, and even from what I've seen with my own eyes, it's easy to see why they're so bullish on him. I just think there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. To me, I like to characterize what I think he's going to be this fall as this. He has the ability to have you up 14-3 at the end of the first quarter, and he's also got the ability to have you down 14-3 at the end of the first quarter because he has got a cannon for an arm, but he's got to understand and figure out what throws he can get away with at a Big Ten level and which ones are going to turn into turnovers. Because if I've heard anything out of PJ's Fleck's mouth in the last 7 years now, the ball is the program. And I am going to be incredibly interested to see because this offense overall is going to transition from one that I think it was them in the service academies for passing attempts last fall. I mean, it was something is what I would say. And now without Mo Ibrahim, without your all-world center who's now with the New York Giants and second-round draft pick, another kid out of Illinois there, and John Michael Schmitz, they're going to pass. I mean, I've said this before and I'll continue to say it. They're going to throw more than any other year, I think, in Fleck's tenure at Western Michigan or Minnesota because that's where their strengths lie. And obviously with that becomes more opportunities for turnover. So it's going to be very interesting to me to see the dynamic between PJ Fleck and Ethan when Ethan has one of those games where he's got 2 turnovers in the first 20 minutes of the game. Does Fleck retreat into his shell and say, we're just going to figure out how to run the ball? Or does he let the kid learn as he continues to go through his first full year as the starter?
Let's talk about that run game a little bit. Obviously, Mo Ibrahim, an all-time Big Ten great, let alone Minnesota great. Trey Potts, good running back too. John Michael Schmitz, second-round pick of the Giants. What do you think they have there in the running game? Because obviously that's been such a strength for them. And I hate asking a 2-part question, but add a lot of wide receivers because they needed it, right, in the transfer portal. So what else do they have around Ethan?
Yeah, I think running back is going to be very interesting to me because they brought in a kid from Western Michigan by the name of Sean Tyler, someone who was 2-time All-MAC the last 2 years, but he's not Mo Ibrahim. And I think the biggest thing I would say to that is you think of Mo Ibrahim, you think of a 35-carry game like he did against Iowa last year where he ran for 200 yards. Sean Tyler and Mo Ibrahim may be similar in stature in terms of being shorter running backs, but they're very different in play styles. In Sean Tyler's entire career, he's only had 3 games of 20-plus carries. So this isn't a guy that's going to he's not your bell cow. He's someone that's going to touch the ball 15 to 18 times a game in different ways. And he's got breakaway speed where if he gets into the open field, I mean, that was the one knock against Ibrahim was if he gets green, you're going to catch him. It's pretty much guaranteed. But if Tyler gets space, he's going to house it. I mean, he's got 3 career return touchdowns for the Broncos there as well. But they're trying to figure out who's going to get that additional 20-ish carries. It's likely going to be 2 freshmen, one by the name of Zach Evans, a redshirt guy, has really popped in the spring game the last 2 years, scored a touchdown in garbage time last year. more of a north-south guy to go with Sean Tyler's east-west, or is it going to be a true freshman potentially by the name of Darius Taylor out of Michigan, someone that Michigan tried to flip, someone that Michigan State tried to flip. He stayed loyal to Minnesota, went through spring ball, and especially for true freshmen, I don't know where you stand on this. I have a hard time ever projecting in this day and age that a kid who comes in June is going to play, just because it's so difficult with that transition from the high school to college. And that's where Darius Taylor being here in January, I think, is meaningful. But I think the strengths with this offense, to go with Ethan, is the pass catching core. Something I haven't been able to say, something that PJ Fleck hasn't been able to say. Can't tell you how many press conferences I've been to the last 2 years where he's just bemoaned his receiving core for drops and different things like that. But I think there's a lot of clay there to work with. I think they got one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten in Brevin Spanford coming back for year 6, someone that caught as many passes as a Gopher tight end has since Matt Spaeth did it in 2006. I think he's probably going to be a top 100 pick in the next NFL draft. You got Daniel Jackson back, who scored 3 touchdowns in the final 2 games. I'm really bullish on Charlotte transfer Elijah Spencer. Was the Conference USA freshman of the year back in 2021. He produced in the Conference USA in his first 2 years. I thought it translated really well here in the spring. I'm very curious to see how it goes for him. Last year, Minnesota was absolutely putrid in the slot. I mean, they were just god-awful. So what do? They would go out and sign arguably the best slot receiver in the MAC in Corey Crooms, who was 2-time, I believe, All-MAC there as well. And then we haven't even talked about Chris Ottman-Bell, someone that is back for year 7.
He was in the Ricky Smalling class for Illini fans, 2016, I believe it was, class, 2017.
So it's, he's coming off a meniscus and a full knee repair. We just talked to him the other day. He hasn't been fully cleared yet. His hope is to be cleared here before game 1, or here in the next few weeks at least. So it's funny to look at how this offense, they got a new play caller with Kirk Shiraka now at Rutgers, but last year the strengths were the running game, and that was the offensive line and Mo Ibrahim. This year, I think things have flip-flopped. I think the question marks lie in the offensive line. I think the question marks lie in the running back room. And I think the passing game is going to be the reason why Minnesota wins games this fall.
Phil Parker is still at Iowa, so it's hard to say this guy's the best defense coordinator in the Big Ten West. But with Ryan Walters now at Purdue, Jim Leonard now out of the West, Joe Rossi has a great case for being number 2 defensive coordinator in the Big Ten West. Under 18 points per game each of the last 2 seasons, 13.8 last year, I think top 10, top 5 nationally. What's made Joe Rossi and that defense so good? Because they were bad before he got in there. And do they have a chance to keep that standard this season on defense?
One of the things I'm very thankful for with Illinois in my time here with PJ Fleck is Illinois got Rob Smith fired when Minnesota went into Champaign and just got boat raced. I mean, it was embarrassing defensively. I mean, just embarrassing. And I think
that was a bad Illinois team, and it was 55-14 at one point in that game.
Oh yeah. Yep. And the funniest part about that is I think right after that game, or it may have been the week after, PJ Fleck fires Rob Smith, elevates Joe Rossi. And then that next game, so 5 days later, Minnesota hosts a white-hot Purdue team at home at the time. Purdue was coming off, I think they'd won 5 of their last 6. Jeff Brom had that thing going. They'd scored 28 or more in all those. And they come into Minneapolis, that same team, same defense that gave up 50 to Illinois, allowed 10 points at home to Purdue. And then ultimately, Joe Rossi has gone from there. But if you want to know 2 things about Joe Rossi, he's going to do 2 things. He's going to stop the run. Minnesota's been one of the best run defenses in the country. And then they're going to do 2 other things. Number 1, they're going to get off the field on 3rd down. They were the 2nd team in the country in terms of 3rd down, getting off the field there. And then they do not, I would say, limiting explosive plays is the other big thing. I mean, that's what Joe Rossi wants to make you do. 8 plays, 10 plays, 12 plays, 14 play drives, especially at the collegiate football level. I don't have to tell you, more times than not, somebody's going to make a mistake. But it's those 6 play, 75-yard scoring drives that kill you. So if Minnesota loses, it's going to be, probably gave up too many explosive plays, couldn't stop the run. But Minnesota's been really good under Joe Rossi at doing those things. But limiting explosive plays is something I've heard Joe Rossi say week after week after week for years now. And I think he's been pretty successful at limiting those.
Do you think they'll be pretty good on that side of the ball again?
I think I don't really know what to think yet, because I would say this. I think they'll be better in their front seven. They were absolutely dreadful in the pass rush last year, but I would say that they were breaking in a lot of new guys for the first time. Like their entire starting core from last year comes back this year, more or less, outside of a couple of positions. I mean, they returned 6 of their 8 guys that they rotated in. And I think there is something to be said for a jump from starting games 1 through 12, getting an off season, and then that second year as a full-time starter, you really know what to expect. And I think they have a lot of guys coming back there. They lose Mariano Sori-Marin from their linebacking core, played a lot of football for Minnesota. They're trying to figure out things there. They'll have one of the best safeties in the country in Tyler Nubin, who is just a game changer for them. He's their best player defensively. I mean, I remember, I'm sure you like you do, when Minnesota played Illinois, him making plays in coverage, making plays near the line of scrimmage with a couple tackles for loss in that game. But I have questions at corner. Minnesota lost 2 kids that played. They had 4 corners that played last year. One's now in the NFL with the Chicago Bears and Terrell Smith. One hit the portal, is now at West Virginia, and another one just retired midway through spring ball. So it's Justin Wally, who I think is a quality corner, but then it's what? I mean, Minnesota brought in some transfers there, but there are question marks that I have defensively that need to be answered to really know how good is this Minnesota team. Probably just like you do. I mean, you know that obviously Illinois' front seven is really good. What does it look like with all the talent that they lost on the back end there? But, I just think that the variance for this Minnesota team can be anywhere from 6 wins. I could see 9 wins. I just have so many questions. I feel like this is a very difficult year to predict for Minnesota with what they have schedule-wise and the question marks that I really don't know how to answer quite yet. Yeah. And I know that we're only just 6-7 weeks away from the season yet.
Yeah, sounds a little bit like Illinois, except for the schedule here, because we got to bring this up for Minnesota. Mm-hmm. What would be a successful season for Minnesota, especially given the schedule includes Michigan, Ohio State? I don't want to throw Michigan State in there, but still, that's not an easy crossover, say like Indiana or something like that. So what would be a successful season for Minnesota?
That's a great question. I mean, I look at those 2 games, and I think those are the only 2 games I look at on the schedule personally and say Minnesota is going to be a double-digit underdog with a bullet. I mean, I just think there's so many other types of games. Like Minnesota's got to travel to Chapel Hill and take on Drake May in North Carolina. But I also know that ACC versus PJ Fleck here in that tenure, Minnesota's done pretty well in terms of their physicality from the Big Ten going against the ACC. I mean, you look at the amount of quarterback talent. I feel like the last couple of years, Minnesota's gotten some breaks with not having talented quarterbacks face them. Well, I mean, this year you've got Kyle McCord at Ohio State, J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, Drake May, obviously with North Carolina. I think there's as much quarterback talent in the West, I think, as I've seen in quite some time. I mean, whether it's prospect pedigree with guys like Ethan Kaliak-Manis, Luke Altmaier there, obviously. Then you got Hudson Card at Purdue, Tanner Mordecai. I mean, there are a lot of talented quarterbacks in theory in the West this year. So how does Minnesota kind of respond to all that is my question. I mean, so what determines success? I think you got to win at least one of your rivalry games. That's easier said than done when you haven't won in Iowa City since 1999. It's been a long time. It's kind of remarkable because I've covered those last 2 games between Minnesota and Iowa. They've won everywhere on the field except on the scoreboard, which is truly remarkable. And they've obviously beat Wisconsin the last couple of years. They get them at home to end the season. I'd love to see if Braylon Allen is finally healthy. He missed the game 2 years ago, or he either missed the game last year or 2 years ago, and then they really shut him down. So I'm not the one to kind of hype up Braylon Allen because I really haven't seen him at 100% yet. But I'd say success is, if we're just going to go big picture, it's this. When November comes around and you start obviously with Illinois there, and when Illinois comes off a bye week, you want to be still in contention there, if not leading, because it's going to get a lot more difficult towards the end there with Ohio State traveling to Columbus. But keep yourself in the West going into late November and just see where the chips lie, because there are 4 teams I think can win it. I think you probably have Iowa and Wisconsin a tier by themselves, and then Illinois and Minnesota underneath them. But it just wouldn't shock me at the end of the season that if you have one of those Illinois and Minnesotas really kind of come out there, if Iowa continues to just be a dumpster fire on offense, maybe they have some injuries defensively, or just year one of the Luke Fickell era just doesn't quite go how people think. That's how an Illinois or a Minnesota can get to Indianapolis at potentially 8-4, maybe 9-3 there.
Are you going to miss the Big Ten West?
I think what I'll miss is largely the national media just trying to convince everyone that the West was terrible. Now, I know that they don't have the top end that of the Ohio States and the Michigans, and I understand that. I mean, when it gets to Indianapolis, I don't know that remember the last time that the West actually won there. I'm sure it was Wisconsin back in the day. But I just think that the West has come a long way, in my opinion. I mean, we've talked about the elevation of what Brett Bielema has done at Illinois, raising the floor of that program. PJ Fleck at Minnesota. You obviously have Iowa and Wisconsin. I mean, you have 4 viable teams there, I think, each and every year. And we haven't even talked about the Big Ten West champion last season, obviously, in the Purdue Boilermakers. I just think the West probably doesn't get enough credit for what they how they have elevated, I'd say, the floor of the Big Ten overall. But I am excited to not have to go to Ryan Field every single year, where there's going to be 4,500 people. It's going to be incredibly sleepy. I'm excited to head to the Rose Bowl next year to see Minnesota take on UCLA.
Yeah.
And then maybe the most overplayed thing among us Midwest media, I can't wait to see when USC comes out to the Big Ten in terms of having to come to the Midwest. I just hope and pray that either Minnesota's game against them in 24 is in November or Iowa's is. I just want to see if it truly matters to have all these Southern California boys come out and play in 35 degrees and see if they want to be there for something like that.
They're not ready for dilly bars in the snow in Minneapolis.
Dilly Bar Dan, they are not ready to see that kind of energy on the sidelines. If they give up a long play and they look on the Minnesota sidelines and there's a portly man having a dilly bar in 30 degrees and sneak, that's the type of energy I love to think about.
Nothing more Minnesota and Big Ten West than that. So kudos to Dilly Bar Dan. Ryan Burns, Gopher Illustrated, you're the best, man. Enjoy training camp, and we'll talk to you again in the season, man.
All right, appreciate you.